Hi, I'm Kim Walker, Director of the School of Music, and today I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you for the MusicHub event. Each week we're sharing new stories from the faculty and the students, all about what inspired them about music and brought them here to Texas Tech University in the very first place. I hope you'll enjoy these inspired stories at least half as much as I do. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello, and welcome to the Music Hub of the Texas Tech University School of Music. My name is Charles Olivier, and I am your host for this episode of a Music Hub Moment. On today's show, we will be listening to an interview with Dr. Kevin Wass, professor of tuba and euphonium and director of the Tuba Euphonium Ensemble at the School of Music. This semester, Dr. Wass coached and guided his students in producing video performances and online educational material for middle and high school students free to the public. Now let's listen as Dr. Wass explains what the tuba and euphonium are and what it takes to serve the community like his students did this semester. Well, Dr. Wass, thank you so much for coming on to the Music Hub Moment and talking about some of your students and also some of the various projects that you are working on. So our first question, go ahead and tell us what do you do at the School of Music?
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for setting up this session. I'm really excited to talk about my students and the work they've done this semester. My job is professor of tuba and euphonium, so I teach applied music, private lessons to all the students who major in either of those instruments. I also conduct our tuba euphonium ensemble, and I coach chamber music.
Okay, and so this show is just for anyone that's interested in music. So can you go ahead and tell us just a little bit about the tuba, what it looks like, a little history about the instrument?
So the tuba was one of the last instruments to join the orchestra. It wasn't invented until 1835 and didn't really reach its final form that we think of until about the early 1860s. And so composers started using it in the orchestra in the 1850s. Wagner was one of the first to use it regularly and actually became one of the greater proponents of it. The tuba was also developed simultaneously in a lot of different countries. The first patent was filed in Germany, or what's now Germany, what was then Prussia. And then it was heavily developed by the Czechs and also by the Russians into what we call the contrabass tuba now. The French, meanwhile, hung on to one of the predecessors that had keys called the ophicleide. So as a result, we have instruments in all different keys and all different sizes and all different configurations now. So I have one here. This is what we call a contrabass tuba. So these are the largest instruments. They're usually in C or B flat. It's what most people think of when they think of a tuba, is this instrument. This is what we normally play in the orchestra. We also have slightly smaller versions. It's called bass tubas that are usually in the key of F or E flat, and it's very, very similar, same construction, just a little smaller. This is a German design. It's got the rotary valves. There are similar American designs that have piston valves, and so this is the instrument people are used to seeing. Now, obviously, it's very large, and so for marching use and military use, there have been configurations throughout the years for that use, and the most widely known of these is what we call the sousaphone, where it wraps around the body. That's actually based on a German design called a helicon, which also wrapped around the body, so it could be used either on horseback or for marching. We also have, if you see drum and bugle corps, or a lot of marching bands use them, what we call a contrabass bugle that's carried up on the left shoulder. And so tubas can have a lot of different forms, a lot of different sizes, but the main way we identify it is that it's a bass or a contrabass, a voice of the brass family.
See, now I'm just envisioning a mounted sousaphone player on a horse. You know, that would be a sight to see. Never seen that before. That would be extremely interesting.
Yeah, sousaphone's a little larger. So typically when you see them on horseback, this would have been maybe 1850s to 1880s. It would be the helicon, which is slightly smaller and comes up a little higher on the body. It would be easier to use on horseback.
Crazy. It's awesome. It's a great imagery to have. So what about the euphonium? It's a little less known, at least like in the public sphere, but what about history? What is the instrument and stuff like that?
So the euphonium was developed alongside the key to all of this kind of flowering of brass technology was the invention of the piston valve and the rotary valve in the early 1800s, which meant we could move away from keys. And so, the trumpet by that point was already sort of defined as a key bugle, and then they added valves, and it just didn't change it that much. But you'd never been able to have bass, baritone, tenor, contrabass voices in the brass family with the keys. It just didn't work very well. So, even bass instruments like the ophicleide were not widely used. And one of the first promoters to really jump on this was Adolph Sax. Now, we know him more as the inventor of the saxophone, but he actually first invented a whole family of brass instruments called the sax horns. And sax horns had piston valves generally, and were in alternating keys of E flat and B flat, so same as the saxophone family, starting from a sopranino E flat all the way down to a contrabass double B flat. And so there was a B flat range there, what we would consider now the trombone range. So some people call it the tenor trombone, but the exact same instrument with valves is often called a baritone. So it's tenor baritone range. There were a lot of different configurations that were used. And what they finally settled on is what we now call a euphonium. So this is a euphonium. This is a Swiss design. So technically it would be called a tenor tuba. But it's very similar to the British and American euphonium, which has become the most popular instrument for that baritone tenor voice. And in brass bands, it's used in pairs along with baritones, which are voiced the same, but are just a little bit brighter, a little bit smaller. So people who, maybe several generations back in this country would have said, well, I play the baritone in a band. Baritone is a very similar instrument, just a little bit brighter, a little bit smaller, but it's pitched the same, played the same and everything. So in traditional British brass band, you'd have both baritones and euphoniums. For whatever reason, the Americans kind of went with the euphonium sound by about the 1950s. And so for all military band use, it's been used since then. And that's kind of what made it the standard instrument that we use in academia and in the band world now. Around the turn of the 20th century, the euphonium was actually very popular as a solo instrument. And euphonium soloists were sort of second to just the cornet soloist in the band in all these touring bands like the Sousa band. So Simone Mantilla was the euphonium soloist for the Sousa band, was very famous, not quite as famous as Herbert L. Clark, who was the cornet soloist, but certainly was considered his equal as a musician and as a technician. Now, in the symphony orchestra, we use the euphonium very rarely. Usually it's referred to by its German name, the tenor tuba, but Richard Strauss uses it, in fact, very soloistically in Don Quixote. And then he also uses it within the brass section in Ein Heldenleben. There's also a very soloistic part in Holst's suite, The Planets.
So what are some stereotypes and misconceptions that people have about the tuba and euphonium that you would want to correct?
I think one of the big things is, this is one that really gets to me, is that it's a comedic instrument. I think with the tuba, because of the low tessitura and because it's got this kind of diffuse, non-directional sound, and frankly, because for about its first 150 years, it was mostly played pretty badly. There weren't a lot of professional training. Most of the people who were playing the tuba were students or were in the military and had kind of been handed the instrument because they were big enough to hold it. So I think because standards for performance were not high, and also the sound is something that's kind of just unfamiliar to people, it kind of got this reputation of being a comedic instrument. And so, one of my students' favorite things to do is to take that little snippet from the old Price is Right show, when you'd lose and it'd go boom, 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 boom on the tuba. Every tuba player can do that now. It's like a punchline to a joke, sort of like a drummer going, with the rim shots. So I think we're losing that as people more and more hear what tuba players can actually do. One of the things I hear most often when I play or when my students play in a solo setting or a chair music setting is, wow, I didn't know a tuba could do that. What people don't know is that the tuba has the widest range of any brass instrument. It's about a 5-octave range for a professional player. It also has the widest dynamic range of any brass instrument, or any instrument in the orchestra, really, except the organ and some of the percussion instruments. And so composers have realized that. And so especially when they're writing for tuba alone, tuba unaccompanied, there's a huge palette of colors and dynamics and range that they can work with. With the euphonium, I think it's more so, at least with the tuba, we're accepted because that orchestral world, which to a lot of people is still the classical music world, is very much tied to the orchestra. And so for euphonium, when someone says, "Oh, I major in euphonium," or I'm a serious euphonium player, they sort of look at you like, "Isn't that kind of like bagpipe or accordion?" And I guess in a way it kind of is that you become a serious euphonium player because you really love the instrument and you really want to learn to play it on a high level. But I think again it's becoming more accepted as we're moving into kind of a new century and new ways of approaching music beyond just the orchestra and opera world. People are realizing that a musician is a musician. It doesn't really matter what hunk of metal or hunk of wood they're holding on to. And so that's kind of how we try to train the euphonium players now, is to take pride in what they do. It's hard. I mean, they're the only instrument in our school of music that does not have their own teacher. I am a tuba player. I play euphonium pretty well. But this year, for the first time, we have an artist level euphonium player on because I have a graduate assistant on euphonium. So we're still kind of trying to get that acceptance that I think will give them a little bit more legitimacy in the music world.
So in this episode, we're highlighting some of the amazing work that your students have done over the semester. So what type of performances are we going to be seeing, and what types of considerations and processes did the students have to use when creating these projects?
So I've chosen a few things to share with you here. We actually ended up doing a pretty diverse range of assignments over the back half of the semester. Just to give it a little bit of context, what happened was over spring break, we were supposed to be at a conference of the International Tuba Euphonium Association. 15 out of the 17 students in the tuba euphonium ensemble were going to be competing in competitions, either solo or chamber music. The ensemble going to be performing. We were going to be doing a piece that one of our students had arranged specifically for our group. There was a lot of energy around that, and we worked really hard over the first half of the semester to prepare for that, and then the conference was canceled. And then on top of that, we were returning to school only virtually, and had this whole new format to get used to for the back half of the semester. So the good thing was everybody had worked so hard on the first half of the semester that I didn't feel an immense pressure as the teacher to say, okay, we got to get a lot done. I felt like, anything that we accomplished in the back half of the semester was kind of gravy on the semester. Most of the students had learned a lot of repertoire. They'd performed a lot. So, I didn't feel this pressure of like, wow, if we're going to salvage something from the semester, it's going to have to be in these next 6 weeks. So it kind of felt like whatever we did was going to be great. So I think that helped a lot as we were all coming from that same viewpoint. So I sat down with each student over email, and we exchanged a couple of emails and said, okay, here are some ideas I have for how we want to structure lessons. But basically what we did is every student each week would have to upload or post a couple of videos that showed what they were working on. My job was more to step back and say, okay, so how does all this link together? What are we doing from week to week where you're going to be able to have something to show for this at the end of the time? So I met with each student over Zoom for about a half hour after I'd gone through and reviewed all the stuff that they submitted. So I'm going to show you, I've chosen one of just the weekly assignments that a student did, which I thought was really outstanding. And then we also had some special assignments that I did where, one of their favorite things is a YouTube channel that Chris Olka has. Chris Olka is the principal tuba in the Cincinnati Symphony, and he has a channel called The Drill of the Week, and it's these really intense exercises for tuba players. Euphonium players do them too, and it's the kind of stuff that he practices every day as a professional, as a very accomplished professional, and it's sort of a challenge. He puts it up there and says, hey, if you want to be able to play on the level I play on, here's an exercise to do. So I do them, the students do them, we love them. So I said, hey, what if we each created one of those, but instead of gearing it towards like a professional or a college student, let's gear that towards a high school or a middle school student. And so I asked them each the question, like, what was one skill that you have now that you wish you had as a high school player or a middle school player? And you have 5 minutes. You get to do a 5-minute video, completely your own to produce. And in that 5 minutes, you have to teach the exercise by rote. You have to explain the exercise, and perform it so that the student can play along. So each student did one of those. We're going to take a look at one of those. And then at the end of the semester, typically we would do juries. And for that, normally that's getting up in front of a panel of faculty and doing a short performance. Obviously, we couldn't do that this semester. So I tried with each student to sort of wrap up, okay, what is it that you want to work on, and what's a project that we can do to see if you've made some progress on that. So many of them did a performance that they recorded. Some of them even went out and found a piano accompaniment pre-recorded that they could play along with, even with all the challenges that that presents. So we're going to watch a little bit of one of those jury performances that a student did. So for all of that, most of these students had little or experience in recording. I don't think any of them had much experience in video, and especially in video editing. So some of them got really into it and did a lot of editing and really high production value for everything. Others, I think the accomplishment was more what they learned about themselves as people and as players from the experience of having to watch and listen to themselves play every week. And seeing that audience's perspective of how they perform, I think was really valuable for some. For the ensemble, we had a concert scheduled for May 5th, and we'd already kind of planned to do that as mostly small ensembles, maybe one piece on that concert or two pieces with the full ensemble. So as we met on Zoom for our first virtual meeting, I said, hey, what if we try to do a virtual concert? And so I assigned everybody into a small ensemble. The students chose a piece for the large ensemble to record. And we started putting that together. And we'd get together every week and talk about the process and how do you record, and which process do we want to use? Do we want to record everything in audio and then go back and sort of do a horn sync to it, where they're not actually recording as they're doing the video, but they're playing along with the playback. That's the way every 1980s MTV video was done, and every MGM musical in the 40s and 50s was done. Others thought, no, I want what's up there in the video to be what was happening when I played that. So then it was more of a video project. So each ensemble kind of found their own process, and we started with recording like 16 bars, and then we went to recording a full piece and putting the whole project together. And so we'll look at a couple of those in addition to something we did with the full ensemble. We did actually come up with a full concert. We have about a 30-minute concert that we did with a couple of the coached ensembles, small ensembles, and one piece with a large ensemble.
So, not only are you the professor for tuba and euphonium, you also conduct the tuba euphonium ensemble. And not many people know, but that's actually one of my favorite ensembles to listen to. I thoroughly enjoy the concerts every single year that you guys have. And so I was starting to think, what are some considerations and rehearsal techniques that you have to use for such a unique formation?
The biggest consideration is that the instruments are designed to be a choir. And you think, wow, that sounds great. And it is. If what you're doing is to try to sound like a choir. Okay, so the instruments are designed to blend. Not only are they designed, very similarly, you can see the tuba and the euphonium don't look that much different. And acoustically, they're very similar. And so the tone quality is very much the same. And so blending from top to bottom is very, very easy to do. So if we're doing a choral transcription, or if we're doing something that's written for tuba euphonium ensemble that's very much in a choral style, piece of cake. All we have to really do is listen to each other and blend and focus on intonation and moving together. The trick comes when you want to do something different. If you want to do a transcription of a piece that involves instruments of different colors, so we'll do an orchestral transcription from time to time, or a piece that was maybe written for band, or maybe even some pop music or jazz music, and then all of a sudden you want certain parts to jump out of the texture. And that's a great teaching moment for us, but it's also a great challenge for the performers, because learning to play with that kind of color on a tuba and euphonium is kind of an advanced skill. But it's a great incentive for the students to start to learn that it's not just balance. Their ensemble skills when they get to college mostly are about balance. Well, we're going to turn this up and turn this down. It's like having a big mixer board. And they don't think about things like color. They don't think about things like how much definition are you putting into your playing? Are you drawing attention to your part in a way other than just playing it louder than everybody else? And that's really subtle ensemble skills, but it's also something that's extremely challenging to do on a tuba or euphonium. So in order to do that, I try to program in a way where we're always doing something that's very choral and very blended. I'm always trying to do something that really challenges us to have parts coming in and out of the texture, and then also trying to get genres in there that maybe they don't play, or style periods like the Baroque and Renaissance. It's 300 years before the instruments were invented. This is one of the few ways we can get access to that music, is to transcribe it for the ensemble.
So can you share with us some moments that made you extremely proud of your students this semester, especially in regards to the switch to online learning?
So many. There were so many moments. Seeing people take advantage of the opportunity that was presented to them. I've been involved in a lot of organizations, and I've been involved in a lot of organizations that have had to change, sometimes in a leadership role, sometimes within. What I've always found is when change occurs, the organizations that know what they stand for, if values are clear and if values are accepted across the organization, change is easy. Because you just know, okay, this isn't going to change. We're still going to care about these things. All that's changing is this. And so, I think my students really embrace taking pride in their own performance. And they also really believe in their ability to make changes in that performance is a result of the work that they do. That sounds really simple and that sounds just accepted, but we have to teach those values. That's a lot of my job. This was a good assessment of how we've been doing, because I felt like when the change happened and it was like, okay, now we're still performing, the performances still need to be good, but now everything's going to be recorded and everything's going to be in video. It was like they didn't even miss a beat. They just dove right into it. Now, some of them, it caused big changes. Some of them had confidence issues, right? That sometimes when they perform live, they get really nervous. And then they found that doing a video, they didn't get nervous at all. I'm the opposite. I would rather do 100,000 performances live than one performance, for me personally. And some of the students were the same way. Students who've always performed really well live were making videos and they were like, oh my gosh, this is awful. I can't post this. I can't send this. They were really self-conscious. But one particular moment that jumped to mind, there's this, one of the younger students in the studio. She's not always had the strongest performances. She's an excellent player. I think sometimes her issue comes in preparation. She always wants to do really well, but she doesn't always get all the work done. And then she gets to the performance and kind of has to cram. She was doing a weekly assignment for me. It was worth nothing in her grade, basically. I mean, she could have not even done it and it wouldn't have affected her grade that much. But when I went in to watch the video, it sounded really strange. And then I realized, I was like, she's playing with a practice mute in. And on a euphonium, you can actually put the practice mute all the way down inside the instrument, so you can't even see it. I could just hear that the sound wasn't right. And then I looked down at the timestamp on the video, and it was at 3:29 a.m. that she had posted that video. So the reason she was using a practice mute is because everybody in her house was asleep, and she didn't want to wake anybody up. And, I talked to her in her lesson the next day. I was like, okay, so why did you record at 3:30 a.m.? She said, well, I actually started at 7. But she said, I just wasn't happy with it. And that was such a powerful moment where, I think if she had started practicing at 7 here at Tech and at 7:30 had gotten frustrated, she would have put the horn back in the case and gone to bed and come in and taken her lumps and gotten a C on technique the next day. But the fact that she had to keep recording that video and then watching it and saying, no, that's not good enough. I'm not putting that up. That was a really powerful learning moment for her. So that's just one student, but almost every student, I think, had a moment like that where they, because of the way things had changed, they were forced to listen to themselves differently, and they really had a major breakthrough in their playing.
So now for our last question, but probably a very important question. What advice would you give a student that has a dream of becoming a tuba euphonium professor one day?
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a great question. It's cool. I love when people come to me and I'll talk to students at band and orchestra camp or one of the other camps I teach. Are like, hey, I'd really like to do what you do, and that it's really flattering as someone who has this kind of a job when someone says, hey, I want to be like you. I want to do what you do. So I thought a lot about this question, and this morning I was reading the book review from the New York Times, and the by the book column was Yo-Yo Ma, actually, and he had a little quote in there from Pablo Casals that I had forgotten about, but he met Pablo Casals when he was 7 and asked for advice from the great master, and he said, be a human being who happens to be a musician, who happens to be a cellist. So you're a human being first, you're a musician second, you're a cellist third. One of my teachers, Harvey Phillips, met Pablo Casals when he was very young and was given the same advice. So Harvey always told us, be a human being who happens to be a musician, who happens to be a tuba player. And I think that's the best advice for anybody who wants to have a career in the arts and in music is, if you focus on having great relationships with the people around you, and if you focus every day on trying to do things to help better lives, and then also focus on your art and on your craft, the opportunities are going to be there, whatever those opportunities may be. We don't know what the future opportunities for artists and musicians are going to look like. I don't think that's ever been clearer than it is right now. So many of the things that we've thought about is like the gig, and you have to get a job like this and you'll be able to support yourself. All of a sudden, those jobs aren't there right now. They're going to come back. We know that. We don't know when. We don't know what they're going to look like. But I think people who I see managing to really be successful through all these changes we've seen in the arts are the people who keep focusing on those things. How can I impact the lives of others? How can I connect with people through my teaching and my playing? How can I continue to develop my art? How can I continue to develop my craft? Those are the people who are going to continue to be successful.
Hi, I'm Bridget. I'm going to be talking to you about range, and all you need for this exercise is a B-flat scale. So if you're like me, range can be a little frustrating, especially when a lot of the things that people recommend to you don't seem to work for you, like, oh, why don't you just buzz it on the mouthpiece, then you can play it on the instrument. Range, just like any other technique on the instrument, is something that you can grow over time incrementally. There's no need to stress about it. One thing I like to do when I feel like I'm stuck in a rut with my range is that I just play a simple B-flat scale up and down the scale. Once I get to the bottom of the scale, then I start the same B-flat scale, but on the second degree of the scale. So you play a B-flat up, down, and then when you get to the bottom, then you play the same scale, but starting on C. So it goes a little something like this. I have my metronome here at 84 beats per minute. And so on and so forth. So the basic idea here is that all you're doing is moving your simple B-flat scale up by scale degree until you reach the high B-flat that's 4 ledger lines above the staff. This is a great exercise that you can do just in your daily practice, and eventually you'll start hearing much more clarity in that upper kind of high F to high B flat range. And if you already feel comfortable with that, just pick a different key. And so on and so forth. Range was probably my biggest problem in high school, and it still kind of follows me around today. But I try to do this exercise every so often, and in high school, I tried to do it maybe 4 times a week just so that my range wouldn't hold me back.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Dr. Wass just as much as I did. We look forward to seeing you next Tuesday with another episode of a Music Hub Moment brought to you by the Texas Tech University School of Music. Thank you and have a great week.